Good morning.
Morning. So I realize it's about 6 o'clock at night over there for you.
And it's nice and early for you, so it's perfect.
Okay.
Uh, I still have a family farm in central Illinois.
Oh, wow.
We, we've been farming there since about 1830, and we raised corn and soybeans as I was growing up, along with black Angus cows. And we rent the farm ground out now, but we still have a few head of Angus cows just so we can keep some fresh meat in the freezer every winter.
I get this stuff completely. The frequencies and the microbes, like I wrote about it in 2006. You can see I've got kids' books in 7 languages about it. So I see if this really does do what like the presentation is saying, then you must be thinking, God, how do we get it out into the cereal crops and all that sort of area? Because that's really the big difference on the planet.
Right, right. So I guess a short version of a longer story. I met Frank about 4 years ago, and I've been advising him. I'm a management consultant when I'm not doing this, and today it's pretty much this. But I was also fortunate to graduate from one of the top ag engineering schools in the world at the University of Illinois. Had very good training. I had very, very good training. And I had a double major, one in agricultural science and one in ag engineering, and 5 generations of farmers before me in the local area there. And so farming was definitely in my blood. I used that to go into the military and flew helicopters for a few years, mostly in Germany.
As you do.
Yeah. And then worked for a German-based medical device company for several years after that, where I was the top salesman in the U.S. And then I set up an international distribution network from scratch, which is what took me to Australia. The reason I'm telling you this is that this technology came from a biomedical technology initially. And I may be the only person on the planet that had the ag engineering background and the medical background to kind of pull these two things together to figure out what was going on scientifically in a way that we could explain it to everyday folk and farmers. So about a year ago, my wife and I had a trip planned to Italy anyway. Had a wonderful week in Florence. I know you make statues, and that's a great place for statues, as you know. And took a day trip up to Como and met with the inventor of the technology and his wife. And we probably spent 3 hours with them. And because before I got too deeply into this, I really wanted to look them in the eyes and see the place for myself and really understand what it was that we were doing. And I came home from that comfortable that this was a legitimate technology, that it is brand new, truthfully, is brand new. And they needed some help really understanding how to translate the alternative health world into everyday language. And so I set to work to do that. And the video that you see on the website, I put together last December, I guess it was. And the technology that we have today really has only been in existence since about that time. So it's really the tech version 6 that we have is brand new.
Keep going. I want to know more about your background. So you came back with it. You met with the Italians in Como. I've been to Lagos.
Yeah, so I came back and I sat down with Frank and I said, let's figure out how we can do something. But let me rephrase that. He'd been trying to get me a little more deeply involved for a long time. And so at that point, I kind of acquiesced and began to really do more of a deep dive into the technology.
He introduced you to the who found the scientist, the Italian inventor?
Oh, Frank did. Yeah, Frank. So Frank met Fulvio Baumelli 6 or 7 years ago. Frank's mother had some health issues, and someone had referred Frank to the biomedical clinic in Como, and Frank flew his mom over there, and Fulvio saved her life.
Oh, wow. Okay.
And so Frank said, because Frank speaks fluent Italian, his family is Italian, so he sat down with Fulvio and they started chatting about the technology and what else he had available. And what came out of that was Frank's desire to bring this technology to the agricultural world. And one, just understanding the technology in terms of vibrational bonds and motions between molecules in itself was kind of a huge breakthrough in the ability to communicate what this is. In engineering, we learn about these things like you saw in my video, and it's not a new and understood thing. It's kind of a little corner of engineering that we take into consideration. I mean, it's just, if you have two, look, only in kindergarten do the atoms not move, right? Yeah, when we're learning about them, atoms are just motion. Even the smaller down you go, everything is just motion. And so if you get these groups of motion, we call them, let's say, molecules, and you've got electrons at the end, and those electrons are doing all these things. Anytime you've got motion, you've got a frequency. And if you throw a bunch of these things into a basket, it's like an orchestra, and you have a particular frequency that comes out of it. And that's really what we're modifying. So like the chair you're sitting in has a natural frequency that if you knew exactly what it was and you fed that frequency back into it, you could affect the structure of the chair. Right? So the theory behind the Kyminasi technology is that there are environmentally induced inputs that change the natural vibratory frequencies of the structure of the plant. And that Kyminasi technology is designed so that it initially neutralizes those negative or adverse frequencies. And then Fulvio has mapped out the ideal frequencies associated with basically 5 different aspects of photosynthesis, plus nitric oxide absorption and utilization. So in its simplicity, what this technology is doing, it's reprogramming the plants first by neutralizing any negative inputs, and then like a tuning fork, tuning the plants for optimum absorption of light, water, and nitrogen in the first part of photosynthesis to produce energy, ATP, just like your body uses. And that energy then fuels the second part of photosynthesis, which absorbs carbon dioxide and turns it into sugars and glucose for the plant to use.
Okay, now I have one point in this, because when I was studying it, I had a bit of a realization about something, which is that in my book, when I talk about frequencies, my observation is that as everything has, let's say, an antenna, and there's a frequency that is, like you said about the chair at the beginning, right? That there's actually ways of reading all those frequencies, and that, let's say, nitrogen or phosphorus or whatever, they have a frequency, and effectively the plant could, why would you need the physical thing if you've got the frequency? Because effectively we are all frequencies, and the plant is really seeking that frequency to complete a molecular function. So it takes the substance and it's actually resonating with the frequency of the substance to get the activity that the plant is trying to do. So theoretically, and that's why I'm asking this question, theoretically, you wouldn't need an input because the inputs are providing the frequency for the plant. And the reason I say this is because I know that talking to old-time farmers, they say, well, some of the chemicals that say that the agrochemical companies sell us, we used to use 100 millimeters, now we use 1.5 liters of them to get the same effect. So there's no reason a plant 100 years ago is going to need 1.5 liters of something it only needed 100 mils of before, no matter what the nutrients are like in the soil. To me, it's the frequency of that nutrient that is the thing the plant is seeking, because soil is an aggregate of minerals. Yes, you could deplete the minerals by taking them out of the soil, but because I know that everything's in the atmosphere anyway, and it's all passing over the whole planet, the dust, the minerals, everything's moving always across the land. Theoretically, there is no reason why you would need to put an input into the soil eventually. If the plant gets actually hyper going, it's taking it like the Amazon does from the Sahara Desert. It's taking the nutrients actually out of the air in micro levels and bringing it down. That's how, the only reason the Amazon even has minerals, because it rains so much there, it doesn't take them up from the soil. So is that correct? Is that is my thinking around that about right? What do you think?
if I may just kind of not comment exactly on what you said, but kind of explain the paradigm or the viewpoint that I operate from, it might help explain or better understand what you were just talking about, if you'll permit me. So my reality on plants, and this is true on bodies as well, is you have different levels of action that all affect the function of the plant in this case. So there are physical actions. You can physically pull the weeds out of the field to prevent the weeds from competing with the plant for nutrients. You have all the chemical interactions that are going on in the plant. You have the relationship between the root structure in the plant and the living organisms in the soil, and all of those various chemistries that are going on. And then you have the vibratory frequencies or the energetic aspect of plant growth, which is kind of this new area, and it's not well understood. It can be easily misunderstood. And so you have these three different areas that are working together and interacting. My experience has been, when you try to isolate one of the three, you're only understanding part of the story. Mm-hmm. So, for example, it very well could be that our frequencies are enhancing the plant's ability to produce polypeptides, for example, which is a substance that they produce that helps to create a healthier microbiome around the root structure in the plant. We know that our Kyminasi treated plants grow a more dense root structure. And we also know that they tend to absorb water better. Now, is that because we've modified their pore size to absorb water? Have we modified the water so it's easier to absorb? These are all physical and chemical aspects that are affected by the energetic or vibratory or frequency aspects. And these things all work together from my reality. So I think when we try to describe what's going on, we have to describe it in the context of a holistic view, because they're all working together. So what exactly is our technology doing in terms of these aspects of photosynthesis that I talked about? Are we, for example, enhancing, our microtransmitters are programmed to enhance light, water, and nitrogen absorption, like I said. So how does that affect the plant in a real live way? Well, if you look at most plants, and let's dive into the whole C3, C4, and CAMP thing. So if you look at most plants, 85%, as you know, are C3 plants. C3 plants tend to like a temperate environment, something that's not too hot and not too dry. Why is that? It's because if they start getting overheated, they close down their pores called stomata. Stoma would be one pore, stomata would be more than one pore. And so they've stopped producing energy. They do that to keep the water from evaporating. That's why they do that. And so when they close that down, now they've stopped absorbing water. And so you no longer have the hydrogen, because in the first part, the plant absorbs the hydrogen and oxygen in the form of water. It grabs the hydrogen because it needs the electrons, and it kicks the oxygen out as a waste product. And it produces ATP, and that's what fuels the real work, which occurs in the second part of photosynthesis called the Calvin cycle, where they're grabbing carbon dioxide out of the air and then converting it into the fuel that the plant needs to operate. And our frequencies are also designed, by the way, to smooth out the metabolic activities in the plant. And as an analogy, in humans, if you could smooth out your insulin production and utilization so there are no spikes in insulin, it would be a similar analogy to what our technology is designed to do in a plant. And there are over 3,000 frequencies designed into these microtransmitters, because Fulvio found that it might be a combination of, 24 frequencies that specifically enhance light absorption. It's not just one frequency. It's not just two frequencies. It's really this packet of combination of frequencies. And we are in the very extremely low frequency band, from about 10 hertz to 150 kilohertz. And as you know, the lower the frequency of electromagnetic waves that you use, the longer the wavelength. And these long wavelengths will travel through anything. As a matter of fact, the US Navy, back in the 1970s, used to use extreme low frequency radio waves to communicate with submarines on the other side of the planet. Well, for example, we're setting up a trial in the Negev Desert in Israel to study the effects of the technology on brackish water. So if you have water with a higher salt content, that's a problem for many farms.
Yeah.
It may be in parts of Australia as well.
Does it help counteract the negative effects of contamination? Because a lot of countries have got water contamination issues.
We've got a little evidence, very anecdotal, that it probably does.
I mean, it makes sense that it would, based on what you were saying about it, balancing out the negative effects of how the plant is doing. So I could see that would be a possibility.
Sure. You know, I think that there's probably, if you're looking at the plant's ability to resist disease, if you're starting with a healthy plant to resist disease, I think our technology certainly aids that. Our technology does not add any nutrients to anything. It's a catalytic technology. So if you want to cure a diseased plant, I don't yet know where those edges are in terms of what diseases, how far along in its progression will our technology actually produce a positive effect. Certainly will do no harm. It will probably mitigate anything it runs into. But if a plant is so far progressed in a particular disease progression, there's probably a point where our technology even can't reverse that. Right. So, you know, I get surprised probably every other month with the results we get on some crop that, like, wow, I didn't expect that. So
any negative results?
No, the only thing we can see is like a no effect. And usually if it's a no effect, it's because the crops weren't being irrigated frequently enough. You know, this technology works the same way as if you were tuning a piano.
Yeah.
So you hit your tuning note and then you hit your piano. The simple point I was trying to make is that it's not always so much the volume of water with our technology, it's how frequently the plant gets watered.
It's a good note.
So certainly you have to do it at least once a week because the frequencies will persist in the water for a period of time. You know, if you're in very sandy soil, the water is going to drain away and you probably have to irrigate more frequently than if you're in a very clay soil where it's going to retain that moisture.
So many different types of plants. Do the frequencies have such a broad scope that it can affect everything from a bizarre desert plant to a middle tropic plant and everything in between? Like, has he kind of looked at all gamut of botanical things on the planet?
Short answer is yes,
okay.
Based on what we know right now. So with this technology, we have the ability to build custom frequencies specific to crops, custom frequencies specific to diseases and pests. That takes a little bit of R&D, it takes a little bit of time, it takes a little bit of money. So our initial product here, we wanted to design a product that was pretty much universal. And that's why we looked at these 6 basic functions. You would really understand this technology, understand that there are 6 basic functions. And it's programmed to increase basically the photosynthetic activity in any plant with the first 5 that I'm going to mention: light, water, and nitrogen absorption and utilization, and then carbon dioxide absorption and utilization, and then the whole glucose metabolism efficiency. Those 5 things you've just described photosynthesis.
Mm-hmm.
And then the 6th thing is the nitric oxide absorption and utilization. And nitric oxide is a signaling chemical in the plant. It does a variety of different things. There's a whole sub-science just on nitric oxide in crop science world. And it has some positive effect on pest resistance as well, nitric oxide does. And so those are the 6 components that are programmed into our microtransmitters. And that's how they affect photosynthesis. Let me cover the C3, C4, and CAM just to put that to bed for you, because it's very simple. It's very simple. So on C3 plants, the plants pull in light, water, and nitrogen. They produce energy. They bind the carbon 3 carbons into a substance that is then used in the Calvin cycle, where it pulls the carbon, mixes it in with a fancy enzyme called rubisco, and the rubisco enzyme produces the glucose that powers the plant growth. That's C3. Problem with that is that those C3 plants can get overheated. When that happens, they close down. When they close down, they use up the carbon dioxide that's there, and they stop producing energy. And the rubisco enzyme is a little bit funny because it doesn't care if it's burning carbon or oxygen, and it actually starts grabbing oxygen and running backwards. And so it really shuts down the glucose metabolism in a plant. So that's C3. C4, of course, it binds 4 carbon atoms instead of 3. That's where the name comes from. So on C3, all of this is done on the outer part of the leaf. On C4, on the outer part of the leaf, it's a 2-step process. The outer part of the leaf, the chloroplasts grab the carbon dioxide, they do a chemical change to it, they create a substance called malate, then the malate diffuses into the inner part, the bundle sheath cells of the leaf, and that malate then gives up a carbon molecule, and it goes into the rubisco cycle and it produces glucose, just like in a C3 plant. Now, why is that advantageous for the C4? Well, it eliminates that oxygen problem when you're trying to produce glucose, so that the oxygen is only in the outer part of the leaf, and where the glucose production is occurring, all it gets is carbon. So you don't have this problem of oxygen shutting down your photosynthetic activity.
And so the enzyme gets to keep using the carbon without starting to eat the oxygen.
Exactly.
And so therefore it's still producing energy. Okay.
Correct. So that's the difference between a C3 and a C4. On a CAM, CAM stands for crassulacean acid metabolism. And it's a fancy word that a scientist came up with, and it's really not necessary to even know that, other than it's a different type of photosynthesis. It kind of mimics a C4 type of photosynthesis, but it's all done in the outer cells. And with a CAM plant, it's very simple. It breathes at night, and it uses light during the day to produce glucose. So they open their pores at night,
get rid of the oxygen, take up the air,
bring in the carbon dioxide. It's kind of like filling the gas tank at night, and then they close it up in the morning, and all day they work to, well, it's like bringing in oil at night. They work all day to produce gasoline, and with the light, because that's the thing they need to produce glucose in this case. And at night they open their pores again, and in comes more carbon dioxide. And because we're increasing the plant's ability to absorb and utilize water and light, on a plant that would normally want to shut down in a hotter, drier condition, and we just bought a new device to start testing this directly, start measuring photosynthesis directly. See, photosynthesis works best at a specific wavelength of red light and blue light. Those are the peaks for chlorophyll A to produce photosynthesis. And so it shines a light onto the chloroplast and then measures the dissipation of that energy. And from that, it gives us a measure of the relative photosynthesis activity going on in a leaf. And so we're going to be able to start measuring directly the difference between a Kyminasi treated plant and an untreated plant. And it's going to allow us to begin to gather data that show that on average, under hotter, drier conditions, the pores of these plants are staying open longer. And the theory as to why that would occur is that we're allowing the plant to better utilize the water that it has, to better utilize the light that's available, so it doesn't overheat and it doesn't shut down.
But isn't part of the reason it shuts down is so that it doesn't lose water? Like it doesn't evaporate, because that's what heat does?
Exactly. So if we can increase the plant's ability to use water, it's not sitting there to evaporate. We're actually utilizing it to produce more hydrogen and to kick out the oxygen mechanically.
So, okay, so but why would you want to, if there's no water left in the soil, because you've got an extreme dry condition, and you've got heat drawing it out, why would the plant open its stomata? Because it would be wanting to preserve.
Right, that's how a typical plant will operate. the frequencies in our technology are designed to allow the plant to continue to produce energy, to better utilize the water and light that is there in the plant. So when it would normally want to shut down,